Hello. Welcome to Club Book tonight with Megha Majumdar. My name is Kaylin Creason, and I'm a librarian with Washington County Library, who's a co-host of tonight's event. I'll be your moderator for our discussion and Q&A tonight. Before I introduce our guest properly, allow me to take a moment to tell you a little bit more about what made this possible tonight. So Club Book, if you don't already know, is a program of MELSA, the Metropolitan Library Service Agency, made possible through Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and coordinated by Library Strategies, part of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. Club Book has been a part of the Twin Cities literary landscape in some form for a decade now. Some of you have been along with us for that whole ride, but they've never brought you a season quite like this. So thanks for making the pivot with us to Facebook Live. Thanks also to partnering bookseller Red Balloon Bookshop. A purchase link to a burning, which I can't recommend highly enough, will be available in the comments section of the live feed stream. So go get that now. Have it shipped, pick it up at their lovely store in St. Paul, or have them deliver it personally to your door if you're in the area. One final housekeeping note before we get to the main event. Also in the comments, you'll see a survey link, and Melsa would greatly appreciate hearing what you think of this Club Book program, especially this year and in light of the necessary changes in format this fall. It's super quick and easy, I promise. Without further ado, Megha Majumdar is the pen behind A Burning, one of the most anticipated and best reviewed fiction debuts of 2020. Set in modern-day India, this propulsive narrative hinges around three characters on the margins of society. Jivan, a Muslim girl living in the slums of Kolkata, Lovely, a member of India's intersex hijra community, and P.T. Sir, an opportunistic gym teacher turned right-wing politician. Although fiction, A Burning quickly dismantles the ordinary skepticism that attends the reading of made-up stories, according to The New Yorker, and offers a powerful corrective to the political narratives that have dominated in contemporary India, notes Time magazine. Majumdar is herself a native of Kolkata. She moved to the United States to attend school at Harvard and Johns Hopkins University, and she's currently an editor at literary magazine and independent publisher Catapult. A Burning has won several honors since its June launch, including being picked up by NBC's Today as the summer's Read with Jenna pick. After a short presentation and reading by our guest, we'll have time for audience Q&A. Simply drop your questions into the comments thread here on Facebook and our tech manager will route them to me. So without anything else, let's hear from Megha. Hi,
Kaylin.
Hi, Megha. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for that really lovely introduction. And hi, everybody who's watching. Thank you so much for joining us today. I just want to take a second and say thank you, especially for joining us for some chat about writing and fiction during this really tough year, which continues to be, take us into a really tough fall. I hope that this moment of chatting about a book provides you a bit of rest and respite and perhaps some energy for your own creative work. So I think we're going to start off by, I'm going to read just a little bit from my book, which is called A Burning, and I can provide a really quick introduction to the book, which is, so A Burning is a novel, which is about three people who are chasing really big dreams as the society around them makes this really dangerous turn toward right-wing nationalism. So there's a young woman who all she wants is to rise to the middle class, keep her job at a mall, but she gets into big trouble because of this politically risky comment that she makes on Facebook. The second main character is a school teacher who feels that he's not really having the kind of vigorous impact on his society that he might have hoped for. And he becomes involved in the workings of this right-wing political party. And the third and final main character is called Lovely, and she is somebody who, from the very margins of society, she wants to, she chases the biggest possible dream, the wildest possible dream, I think, which is to become a movie star. So I'm just going to read for a couple minutes from the beginning of A Burning. You smell like smoke, my mother said to me. So I rubbed an oval of soap in my hair and poured a whole bucket of water on myself before a neighbor complained that I was wasting the morning supply. There was a curfew that day. On the main street, a police jeep would creep by every half hour. Daily wage laborers, compelled to work, would come home with arms raised to show they had no weapons. In bed, my wet hair spread on the pillow, I picked up my new phone, purchased with my own salary, screen guard still attached. On Facebook, there was only one conversation. These terrorists attacked the wrong neighborhood. The more I scrolled, the more Facebook unrolled. The night before, I had been at the railway station, no more than a 15-minute walk from my house. I ought to have seen the men who stole up to the open windows and threw flaming torches into the halted train, but all I saw were carriages burning, their doors locked from the outside and dangerously hot. The fire spread to huts bordering the station, smoke filling the chests of those who lived there. More than 100 people died. The government promised compensation to the families of the dead, 80,000 rupees, which, well, the government promises many things. In a video, to the dozen microphones thrust at his chin, the chief minister was saying, "Let the authorities investigate." Somebody had spliced this comment with a video of policemen scratching their heads. It made me laugh. I admired these strangers on Facebook who said anything they wanted to. They were not afraid of making jokes. Whether it was about the police or the ministers, they had their fun. And wasn't that freedom? I'll stop there.
Wow, thank you. That was it's really, I mean, even in its opening, a very powerful story. And it's clear
Thank you,
to see how,
Kaylin.
yeah, it's clear to see how it connects just from that beginning to today. And I can see why it's something that is just, a breakout novel, like a very anticipated debut. So I know a lot of our community members thought that as well, and they submitted some really great questions for you. Before we get into those, is there anything you want to say more about your novel?
I guess thank you to everybody who has read it and engaged with it so thoughtfully. It's been a strange experience publishing my first book in this year, but I have been so grateful for the ways in which the book has found its way to you, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, well, we're grateful for you too. So thank you for giving us a reason to find community tonight. So these are some questions I have from our community that I'm going to read. They were submitted in advance, but please, everyone, feel free to submit any other questions you might have for Megha. So one person writes, I most enjoyed the journey and internal struggles of P.T. Sir. I have to admit, part of the appeal of that storyline for me is, as an American, anything other than our two-party political system seems novel. Were the political elements in A Burning something you envisioned from the get-go, or did you sort of come up with them as the story evolved?
That's a great question. Thank you. So for those watching who don't know, P.T. Sir is the school teacher in the novel. He's the school teacher who gets involved in this right-wing political party. And, I had this system in mind from the start because where this book started was from me looking at what was happening in India and not just in India, really around the world, you know, the rise of the right wing, the rise of this kind of hatred-filled extreme ideology which seeks to govern who belongs where. And I wanted to write about how ordinary people make their way through such a society. You know, how do we move forward? How do we chase our ambitions and live with a sense of meaning and purpose, live with our spirits intact in a time when the institutions around you don't serve you, you know, they don't protect you, and you find that you have to fight against the systems around you in order to live with integrity. um, so P.T. Sir's character came out of thinking about, well, let's imagine this totally ordinary person. You know, he's not evil, he's not a villain, he's just an ordinary school teacher who thinks, well, I thought my job would look different. I thought it would be more of a job which has an impact on these kids, but the kids disdain him and they kind of make jokes about him. And so he gets involved in this political party, which draws him in, and then he has to make these tough moral choices.
Yeah, great and very clear to see. In relation to that, I noticed in the novel, and a few of our readers did as well, that he's only ever called P.T. Sir, which some people might not know, but that's not a name. That's a
Right.
her. And so, what was your intent behind that?
So I just imagined a gym teacher, you know, somebody who is a teacher but doesn't teach an academic subject. And in that is a little bit apart from everybody else, is a little bit apart from, you know, the rest of the teachers. And PT Sir is what we called our gym teacher. When I was growing up in India, PT stands for like physical training. So the physical training teacher was called PT Sir.
Yeah, that's awesome. That totally connects to the next question we have on our list, which is it starts by the question writer saying, I'm trans. And so I really appreciate the hijra character of Lovely. Aside from what you doubtless picked up living in India, did you do any special research on this community to make these depictions seem realistic to your satisfaction? And what was the hardest part about writing Lovely's and hijra community in the book?
I'm so glad that Lovely spoke to you. You know, she is a character who I wrote after a lot of research. And in fact, my background is in social anthropology. So I always turn to ethnography. And there has been excellent, complex ethnographic work on hijra communities by scholars like Gayatri Reddy, Vaibhav Saria. So I read their work, and that was really helpful. And then, you know, I wanted to write this character who, because of her position of complex marginalization, she is intimately acquainted with the oppressive might, the oppressive force of the state, you know? But even from that place, she is somebody who refuses to accept what the society tells her, you know? She's constantly told, well, this is your place in society, but she says, you know what? My dream is to be in the movies. That is what I love, and I'm going to chase that. And so I just wanted to write this kind of joyous arc for somebody who has no illusions, but is so full of spirit, is so full of defiance and joy, and has a great sense of humor. You know, I wanted to write a person who has all of that complexity, who is so much more than their struggle or their suffering. You know, she watches TV, she hangs out with her sisters, you know, she makes jokes, she teases people back when they try to shame her on the street. And yeah, I really enjoyed writing Lovely.
That's wonderful. And I think readers can see that you do find a very authentic voice, it feels like. with her. She's a very fun character to read, and definitely, and you would know more about this as being an editor and in publishing, but she does not fit into kind of the tragic gay or tragic LGBTQ stereotype that so often in decades past has been seen. And so that's a very cool thing. And speaking of editing and publishing, we have a live question that just came in about which you can speak to as an author and editor. How would you recommend that somebody, a writer, find editors, agents, and others, or like maybe tell your story about getting your job at Catapult or getting your book published? Yeah.
Yeah. So in addition to writing, I have a full-time job, which is editing at a small press called Catapult, which is based here in New York. I think, you know, the first piece of advice I would have, and I'm guessing this is coming from a fellow writer and somebody who is perhaps starting to think about sending their work out. You know, the first thing I would say is to make sure that the book, the manuscript that you're going out with is in its strongest possible shape. You know, that doesn't mean, you know, anything like perfection. There's no perfect manuscript, but just getting it to a place where you feel that you are no longer able to make it any stronger. Perhaps you can see the problems, but you don't know how to fix them. So that's when you need an agent and an editor. And then, you know, a good place to start, and this is something that I did, was I looked at books that I love and books that I felt my novel would be in conversation with, and look at who agented those books. And you can see that information if you flip open any book and go to the acknowledgements in the back. The agent and editor will typically be thanked, so you can kind of see their names and you can Google them, and they will have usually they will have a web page where they have more information on what books they have worked on, what they're looking for, how to query them, and all of that information. So that is a good place to start. I think doing your research and figuring out, well, this agent works with such and such author, that's a really good way to proceed. And then your agent really guides you in submitting to editors. I think that perhaps this is not super common knowledge, but when you're a writer, typically you don't submit directly to publishing houses. You sign with an agent who does that for you, and it serves you as the writer to have an agent that you trust, because not only will they help you polish up your manuscript, do some more editorial work, but they also have relationships with editors and know who is looking for what kind of book, what publisher publishes what kind of book, and they can really guide you in making thoughtful submissions.
Thank you so much. That question was from Mia. So thank you, Mia. And
Thanks, Mia.
Mia out. Kind of along that spectrum. So like as an editor too, you're very familiar now with that beginning part of the process, from editing a book to selling a book. We had one reader ask though about, on the other end, you were featured on the Today Show as a Read with Jenna pick, and our question asker wants to know what on earth that was like what your reaction was, and just how did that feel?
It was bananas. I couldn't believe it. I wrote this book over about 4 years. The whole time I had this full-time job. So I was really carving out, a half hour here, 45 minutes there to work on this book. And the book is set in India, so I wasn't really sure that there would be any American interest in the book. So when I heard about the Today Show Read with Jenna news, I think it was an email from my incredible publicist, Gabrielle. And And it was just a moment of shock. It's this moment of feeling like, wait, do they mean me? My book? Did they make a mistake?
Yeah.
So, and I feel like along this book journey, there have been moments like that, of the book being lifted up, of the book being reviewed thoughtfully, etc. Which, when you get the good news, you're kind of, it's kind of like you're watching someone else get the good news. It's hard to believe that it's happening for you, because in your head it's just you and this Word document, and you're still kind of chipping away at it. So I've been really, really grateful for it. And then I got to go on TV. I mean, I was here in my living room, but I was on TV briefly, and I got to chat with them, and it was so cool. I think I was so nervous that, like, they had me do it on my cell phone, and I was so nervous that I sat way too close to my cell phone and looked terrible, but I was very happy.
That's a wonderful story. So good, and your novel totally deserves that recognition. And kind of going into that, I've heard you say that in a few interviews, and it's very true that your novel is set in India and very Indian, and yet it's had this just powerful resonance with an American audience. And so, what do you? I mean, readers can obviously speak to themselves what resonates with them, but what is it, do you think, that makes this such a resonant novel right now in America?
That's a great question. I think part of it might be that this is a year where, we are all thinking about the injustices around us, the ways in which the pandemic has exposed, fault lines, has exposed biases and prejudices, the wave of Black Lives Matter protests and uprisings. I think this is a year where people are thinking about how the systems and institutions that we are surrounded by treat us. What kind of institutions have we made, and how do we live with integrity, and how do we live with our spirits intact in this time? And I think those connect pretty powerfully to questions in the book. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I've read the book, and that totally makes sense to me. That's a great answer. So a couple other, actually, we have quite a few audience questions that were submitted in advance. So thank you to the people who submitted those. It's great to see such a good response to this, and it's not a
Yeah.
surprise at all. I want to ask about the writing of the novel a little more. So a burning moves at such a brisk pace, someone writes, with the point of view snapping frequently between main characters. Did you set out to make it snappy in this way, or was it a style that came about organically?
I love this question. I knew that I wanted the book to ask forceful questions, that felt like they had real world stakes and political stakes. But at the same time, I didn't want to write something that would be, kind of dry or polemical. I wanted it to be a book that had intellectual seriousness, but also a book where at the end of your workday, you can maybe pick it up instead of watching TV and still be super absorbed in it. And that was a craft challenge that I set myself, is, can I do that? Can I write a book which has intellectual heft and seriousness, but is also really fun and entertaining? And I think that sometimes, things that are entertaining can get disdained a little bit, but I think that it is so powerful to absorb a reader or a viewer in your story to the point where they want to know what happens next. That's the whole thing of binge watching a show, is you want to know what happens to this person. I need to know where the story goes. And I think that there is such craft, there is such skill in trying to do something like that. So I wanted to see if I could do it. And so I did want it to be very intentionally pacey and swift and, you know, help you turn the pages, but also make you think about the society around you.
Yeah, I think you definitely succeed in that. Now that you say there's like a binge quality to it, it's totally true. Like those short chapters, I had to know. I had to know what was coming. And I wasn't disappointed. Which, speaking more to the writing style, I love this person's question because it's just very honest. Some of the narration is first person, but some is third person. I couldn't crack the code. What drove what was used where, if that makes sense?
I love all of these writerly questions. I feel like this is all coming from writers working on your own stories or essays or, you know, whatever art you're working on. And it's really fun to have your questions. So thank you. First person and third person. So two of the characters I wrote in first person. And by the way, this is something that I toggled, like I wrote sections in third, changed them back to first, changed them back. So a lot of figuring out what was working. But eventually I landed on first person for Lovely and Jivan because I felt like the reader needed to be really close to their bodily experience of moving through the world. And with PT Sir, who is in third person, I wanted to have the reader understand why this school teacher is taking these somewhat strange moral decisions, and you know where he's going and what he wants. But at the same time, I wanted the reader to also have a little bit of distance from him, you know, a little bit of room to ask, what is this person doing and why is he doing it? You know, to ask, well, if I had this choice, if I had a shot at a little bit of political power that would give me and my family more comfort, you know, a better standard of living, but it would mean crushing somebody else, would I do it? You know, I wanted the reader to be able to ask those questions.
Wow, yeah, that's very interesting. That's awesome. That's really cool. A great answer. Um, so another real-time question that we have, and this one's pretty cool too. So someone asks, you've clearly incorporated so much of your own upbringing in Kolkata into this book. Are there aspects of the culture, episodes from your life, or other authentic pieces that you couldn't fit into this debut book on India, but wanted to?
So much, you know, imagine reflecting on your own childhood and your own hometown. I think for the book, I wanted to have that sense of specific intelligence, you know, where and this is something that I grew up with, but also after I moved away and started visiting my parents, I would notice this every time I visited, which was people had this strange, very particular intelligence and very particular humor that was growing out of the obstacles that they faced, you know, from living in a place where things don't quite work and maybe you have to, you know, fight to get a reliable water supply, and you know the electricity grid goes down sometimes in the summer when everybody turns their AC on, and you know, stuff like that. And you know, the shopkeeper doesn't have enough change on him, so he devises the system where you get change back in the form of a candy bar. And you know, so like all of this stuff would happen that I noticed, and I felt that there was something so intelligent there. You know, it was all about people being inventive in their daily life, you know, people being creative and figuring out, okay, how do we live in these circumstances, you know? So I wanted that intelligence and that humor in the book, and some of it I got, but some of it, of course, you know, there's just so many stories and so much that I couldn't really have in the book.
Yeah. Oh, that's super. That's very interesting. And I have a question. I know I have another question on here related to India, but I want to know too, and I'm sure our listeners do as well. Um, what's next for you, Megha? Are you working on another book that takes like, I'm sure this is the hot question right now, but you clearly have more to say about this, and I'm sure so much more. So what's next?
I am working on a second novel. It's very different. That's all I'll say. But thank you so much for asking. I really appreciate the interest.
Course. Don't worry, we wouldn't want to make you give more away than you feel comfortable at all. This is the question. So someone was wondering, do you know anything about how this book has been received in India? In India? Like,
what was that, Kaylin?
Oh, I just said, has it been released in India? I don't
know. It came out in India also in June. I still don't have an Indian copy, or else I would have shown you their version of the cover. But it has received, I think, some really thoughtful reviews. It was nominated for a pretty big prize called the JCB Prize, which I was really happy about. It was long listed. It didn't get on the short list, but I was happy that it was on the long list. Yeah, so I mean, one thing that I stopped doing, which I never thought I would actually do before I had my own book out, was I read a bunch of reviews in the early days, and then I stopped reading coverage of the book. I think I was feeling a little overwhelmed by all the constant feedback on something that I made, So I think to protect my brain and energy and mental space, I had to stop reading coverage. So I haven't been reading too much coverage lately, but I have been really grateful for the prize attention and the thoughtful reviews.
Cool. I know you mentioned the cover, or at least wanting to hold up a copy if you had an Indian copy, and we did have a question / comment about the cover, which is just that one question asker absolutely loves it, and they just want to know how it came about, if you inspired it at all, if you got veto power on a cover at all. They were just curious.
That is such a fun question. I love the cover too. It is so beautiful. It is designed by, and in case anybody's joining us a little bit late, this is the cover that we're talking about. I think it is gorgeous. I'm glad that you love it too. And the designer is called Tyler Comrie. So check out his other work, Tyler Comrie. I had nothing to do with it. I can take no credit. This is actually the first and only cover option that they shared with me, and I loved it. It's I guess I could have had veto power if there was something that I truly didn't like, but that never happened. And I was especially happy that they snuck in the train. I don't know if you can see the train. They snuck in a little train, and I have been fascinated by trains since I was a kid. It's one of those temporary societies that really fascinates me, and so I was very happy that we got this on the cover.
Wonderful. In relation to that, we were just wondering too about the title, which is a great title, and I wonder if you knew always that would be the title, if you had other options, what you would say as a short, this is why I picked it kind of a thing. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I had a different working title for a while. I think for a while it was called A Train Burns in Bengal. I remember having that on the document for a long while. but I never loved it. It was just kind of a, working title. And then my agent actually, Eric, who is brilliant and who helped me do a lot else, but he also helped me discuss and brainstorm the title. And I think we landed on a burning because it had that, the book kicks off with a literal burning of a train, of course, but hopefully it also gestures toward the flames of this fervent nationalism that are being fanned around the country and around the world, really. So we felt like it could be read in several different ways, and it was short, which is cool.
It's very catchy. Yes, you remember it quite easily. We have another real-time question, and this might tie into what we were talking about, but someone writes, I heard you say on NPR that there are close links between the US and India if you know where to look. They said, sorry if that's a bad paraphrase. How are we more similar than the average unilingual American might appreciate?
Oh, that is a vast question.
Yeah,
um,
that's good.
I think there are so many similarities. If I recall, I think we were talking about that in the context on the NPR interview. We were talking about it in the context of similarities between white supremacy in the U.S. And Hindu nationalism in India. Both of which are again these kind of hateful, extremist ideologies based on governing purity, and laying down rules around who belongs in a certain place. But maybe it's more fun to think about the more joyful similarities. I think I moved here from India to go to college, and something that I have come to appreciate is the great diversity of regions. Every region has its own kind of, foods that you're fond of, and accents, and landscapes, of course, and also I think the love of literature. I feel like I have really grown up as a reader in the US, reading contemporary American literature, um, and the love of literature is so strong. Where I grew up in Kolkata, it's actually really known as a literary city. So I think this love and protection of literature, the idea that reading holds value, no matter how many other forms of entertainment exist, and no matter what else you can do with your time, reading holds value. And I'm here with a librarian, and I feel like
fervently, yeah.
so yeah.
That's so cool to hear. That's amazing. And I love your how you answered that question and then also turned it to let's focus on what's hopeful, because that's really wonderful as well. And we do have one more live question, but before we get to that, I want to ask, I know you've said in other interviews and even in our conversation today that a lot of the stories about these characters striving toward their dreams. And so when we think of, I don't know, just like, and hearing you talk, you're very buoyant and hopeful. And do you think it's a hopeful novel? What do or yeah.
I think, I think that's something that each reader will definitely have their own opinion about. I was coming at it from a place of, clear-eyed looking at how certain people can be punished for, who they are and their place in society, and the kind of narrative that is easy to impose upon them. but I was coming at it from a place of hope, the shape of the book as I saw it was, and without giving too much away, the shape of the book is one kind of central downward arc surrounded by two upward arcs. So, there are two major storylines in the book where people rise, and so is that rise, is that success pure and unpolluted? I don't know, maybe there are compromises that people have to make in such a society. And I was interested in thinking about that. What does success look like in such a society? Can you lift up others along with you in such a society, or is it just you versus other people? So there are questions here about, what does success and victory look like, and can they be unpolluted? But I was coming at it also from the perspective of characters who are determined and who pursue big dreams and are not satisfied with where they are in their lives.
That's great. Thank you for answering that. Another live question we have, which connects to the other one about similarities between the US and India, or at least an American understanding of India, is that striving for middle class is a big part of Jivan's storyline. And this person writes, my college roommate from Bangalore always talked about how classes in that part of the world are not quite how economic classes are understood in the US. Could you educate us on the meaningful differences as you see them, and maybe how that connects to the centrality of the book?
I think so. Class mobility, if you read anything about India over the previous few decades, class mobility is always discussed. For a while, there were all of these magazine articles about India's huge middle class. And part of where the central character, Jivan, who is the woman who works at a mall, where this character comes from is, she's part of a new class of workers in India who suddenly have these opportunities because you start to have malls, you start to have more retail opportunities, you start to have more restaurants and more people who work in food delivery, for instance. So all of these new opportunities opened up where their parents, perhaps the only options available to them were, in this story, I have a father who drove a rickshaw. So there is this kind of expansion of the middle class where people who were not in the middle class before are able to climb up into it because of this layer of jobs in retail, jobs at restaurants, jobs, created by the upper middle classes who have more wealth and can spend, getting takeout or going to restaurants or whatever, buying shoes at malls and whatever. So I wanted to write about that expanding sense of class and this sense of aspiration too. You have people who are able to afford a cell phone plan where they might not have been able to afford one before. In India, actually, phone plans are one of the most affordable things, and it's resulting in a ton of new people gaining access to the internet, gaining access to social media. You read about rural villagers who are gaining access to market information and weather information that they didn't have before. So all of these things are having all of these kind of complex effects on class, the spread of wealth, and I was definitely interested in that.
Cool. Speaking, you mentioned social media too, and I know that plays a huge role in the kind of inciting incidents of the book. And so does this idea kind of perception and how the three characters want to be perceived. Yeah, what was kind of your goal in writing about those themes?
Social media. I was interested in how there might sometimes be this notion that social media is this free terrain. You can make jokes, you can say whatever you want, there are no consequences. And I was interested in looking at how, for people who have certain vulnerabilities in their real life, those vulnerabilities carry over into the space of the internet. It's not a space where you are free or anonymous in any meaningful way anymore. So I wanted to see how Jivan is trying to affect this kind of middle class freedom, and one of her ways of exercising that freedom is by saying something reckless on social media. But she forgets that she has, because of her identity and her background, she attracts the attention of the state in a way where a different narrative is imposed on her life.
Really fascinating. I can say your interview right now is making me want to reread the book. So if you're listening right now and you haven't read the book, this is just going to inform it so much. It's really—
Oh my God, Kaylin. I can imagine that your to-read list is literally hundreds of books long. So
I might have bitten off a little more than I could chew. That could be accurate. You say with all the books behind you. Another question from social media. Did you do any research to inform? I'm sure you did quite a bit of research to inform the novel, but even though it's a work of fiction, they said, for instance, they want to know more about the terrorist attack that kicks off the book. Is it modeled on a real incident? I'm sure there are other incidents maybe too, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the attack on the train that's right in the beginning of the book, I made it up. I know that for people who are familiar with India and Indian politics, it might have resonances to another incident, but I made this one up. I did research, like I said, reading ethnographies. I did research for textures and places that I didn't have access to. For instance, I watched these local news documentaries or like news clips. I'm not quite sure what to call them, but they're just these videos of places like the kitchen in a women's prison, for instance, where I was trying to see, well, what does this space look like, and you have all of these videos on YouTube of local news crews going into these places and doing some kind of report. So I found those really, really helpful. But a lot of this is really drawn from my own observations of growing up in India. And I have family, so I go every year almost, and I wanted to write about the stuff that I always remembered, like the guava seller who, sells his fruit at the end of your street and you have kind of a joking, teasing relationship with him. Or, you get on a train and it is so crowded and there are 5 people squeezed into, a seat that's meant for 3, and there's somebody's purse poking your head. And, I wanted to write about the stuff that I saw and remembered.
And I'm sure some of those memories were even more visceral now that you're in New York, and some of those things are still still the same.
Too true.
So another question, and this is kind of a fun pivot, and the person prefaces with, I'm sure you get this question all the time, but which character was hardest to find the voice for?
Oh, that's a great question. I think one character that for all of the characters, it's a little bit like, you try writing them and you try writing them until you finally hook into their voice. But I think I definitely remember that happening with Lovely's voice. Lovely has a pretty distinctive voice in the book. And I wanted to write her voice with traces of, you know, the particular history of English in India. It was once the language of the colonizer, and, you know, now it's the language of privilege and the elite. When I was a kid, for instance, I was told that I needed to get better at English. I went to these English coaching classes when I was in kindergarten. And so this thing of, you know, you have to learn English to get ahead, it is the language of the future, etc., that was so much a part of the reality for Lovely that I really wanted it to be part of her English and how she spoke. And so to do that in a way which respected this character's complexity and integrity, you know, I worked hard on that.
It's Lovely has just such a wonderful voice that feels very true to her. So I would say you succeeded. I'm just one reader, but
Thank you, Kaylin. You're so generous.
I'm just saying things that are true, but thank you. Okay, another question from our live audience. Did you have any say in the production of the audiobook? They say, I'm an Audible junkie, not done with this book yet, but getting there. Anyway, it seems so well put together. Do you get some credit for that?
The only participation I had in making the audiobook was I had these phone calls with the audiobook director. And by the way, I had no idea that some audiobooks have directors. I did not know that until I spoke to this director. And, you know, she was, I think, helping select people, the actors who would read. For those who haven't listened, it's, you know, read by a full cast of actors. And we talked about things like, you know, how old do you think the characters are? What do you think their mood would be in this scene? You know, do you think, you know, what kind of attitude or, you know, brashness or softness, or, you know, where would they fall on that kind of spectrum? So we had some really thoughtful conversations, really digging into the characters' motivations and backgrounds, and, you know, what they might be burying when they're speaking, what they might be speaking toward, like all of these really intricate questions, which really helped me think anew about these characters, you know. So that was a really fun process. But then, you know, the PRH team just kind of went ahead, and the actors have done a beautiful job. I've just listened to samples. I haven't listened to the whole thing yet, but I'm so glad that you're enjoying it.
What's my follow-up question then is, for any of those samples you've listened to, how have they shed possibly new light, or any of the questions the actors asked, like how have they made you look at the novel differently or made you realize things about it?
You know, listening to their samples, it was so interesting because, you know, we talked about some of the practical stuff, of course, like this is the kind of accent that this person would have, and there were kind of regional differences, but also just thinking about, you know, what kind of buoyancy or what kind of spirit or what kind of like teasing inflection would be in someone's voice. And when it's kind of hard to talk about these things in the abstract, but when you listen to a sample, you can say, well, this sounds great, or this sounds slightly off for this reason. And I think having to articulate why something is right, or why something sounds like it's not quite there yet, or why you love the sound of this actor. Having to articulate that is such a useful exercise for me as a writer, because it forces me to really get into the details of, well, what are the things that I imagined about these characters that I didn't write on the page.
Ah, oh, that's very cool. That's a cool new world to explore, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Which I have another question like that someone said, and you can't answer all of it, maybe, but someone asks that maybe there are rumors about a movie, but they want to know, I don't know if you can speak to that, but they do want to know who you would cast as the three characters.
Oh my God.
No, that's
um,
hard.
this is a hard question. I am I don't think I have even allowed myself to dare to daydream of these things. If there is a screen adaptation, I will be so excited and so grateful, but I feel like I'm not even touching it in my imagination.
Totally fair. You've got enough to take in already, it sounds like. So, which I know we're starting to head into wrap up territory a little bit. So before I get into a couple final questions, is there anything you want to like say or clarify from the past couple? Like, are you, yeah, anything you want to say unprompted?
Thank you, Kaylin. This is so thoughtful of you. I would love to take a minute to shout out a couple other books from actually from two different Minnesota presses, books that I have read this year and loved, if that's okay. So one book is The Shame by Mckenna Goodman, and this is out from Milkweed. And it's a very slim novel. It's a super, one sitting book. And it's a really beautiful novel about making art and being a mother and this kind of strange and urgent road trip. So this one is called The Shame. And the other book, which I gathered here, also from a Minnesota press. This one is from Grey Wolf. It's called American Harvest. It's by Marie Mutsuki Mockett, and this one is nonfiction. So for people watching who love to read nonfiction, as I do, this is for you. This is about the author, Marie, follows this group of people who are harvesting wheat, and they basically go from I think Texas to Idaho, just harvesting wheat at all of these different farms. And it's about, religion and agriculture and geology and history and all of this. And this is a fatter book, not a one sitting book, but such a beautiful book, which I really loved.
Well, it's like you read my mind because my last couple questions are going to be about what you're reading or what you recommend. And it's wonderful of you to not only take the time to read, but to shout out some Minnesota Publishing House productions. So thank you very much for that.
My pleasure.
Those both sound great. For people who really, I mean, who loved A Burning, like so many of us did, what would you recommend we read next? Do you have any, I know you said you looked into some books that could be in conversation with your book when you were submitting it. Do you have any titles?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, what books was I thinking about? I was probably thinking about, big books that felt politically engaged, Tayari Jones, Marlon James, Rachel Kushner, Zadie Smith. But I actually have a newer book, which I also would love to recommend, which I think, if you liked A Burning, you would probably love this. It's called The Death of Vivek Oji, and it's by a writer called Akwaeke Emezi. And this is such a beautiful, heartbreaking novel, which takes on social themes, very socially engaged, but about such vigorous, robust, unforgettable characters. I really loved this novel.
So that sounds a lot like your book in the sense of you have very robust, unforgettable characters that it was just a pleasure to look into their world. It's been, I don't know where we're at for time, but it's been so much of a pleasure to get to know them more through you tonight, and to have you with us to share more about your amazing book.
Thank you so much, Kaylin. Thank you for being so generous and for putting, all of these questions together. I can imagine that you are just swamped with work at the library. So I'm really grateful that you took the time to do this. And thank you for bringing such great energy. I know it's just a Zoom, but I really feel the energy of this Zoom room. So thank you so much.
It's true. It's been wonderful. This has been the highlight of my week. I'm hopeful it's been the highlight of others watching their week as well. Thank you, everyone, for submitting such thoughtful questions. We were talking about it beforehand, and you really went above and beyond. So thank you to our community for their engagement. And thank you so much, Megha, for making time for us and for writing this really, just like urgent and immersive and essential book.
Thank you, Kaylin. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, now I'm going to read my little end spiel. Thank you, David, for the reminder. But thank you so much, everyone. That's all we have time for this evening. Thank you again, Megha, for scheduling us in. I know your fall's been really busy. So this has been a virtual presentation of Club Book, a long-running literary series of NELSA made possible by the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Before you log off, please look in our comments for the survey link. It'll be projected in place of the video pretty soon here. This is the last event in Club Book's fall season lineup, but we will return to you in March, so look forward to that. In the meantime, you can watch video recordings of 2020 events and dive into a 100 plus podcast episode archive going back to 2013 at clubbook.org. Again, clubbook.org. So thank you, Megha. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Kaylin. Thank you, everyone. Bye.